Ryan Murphy and Netflix just put out their second installment in the Monster series, this time dramatizing the lives of Lyle and Erik Menendez. And just like last time, there's a lot of discussions online about the ethics of depicting the murders and intimate moments of real people on screen. Some say it's exploitative to profit from the tragedies people go through by making TV shows about them. But I don't think depicting true crimes or real characters is inherently wrong. But how much creative freedom with the facts should they have? I've seen some articles and people online saying it's mostly offensive because they depict Lyle as more emotional and angry than he was in real life, and that the show promotes rumors and lies about them. I also found several articles that said Erik's wife, Tammy Menendez, posted on X a statement where he condemns the show. So now, Murphy shapes his horrible narrative through vile and appalling character portrayals of Lyle and me, and disheartening slander.
You got a phone call from the night before the series premiered, as we understand. What did he say?
You know, we had a really nice conversation, and I got to basically just tell him that I believe him, and I did everything that I could in my power as an actor to portray him as accurately and as authentically as possible. And to his statement, you know, I understand how he feels, and I get that it's so difficult to, you know, have your life, and not even just your life, but the worst part of your life be televised in a sort of dramatized Hollywood TV version of it, so.
Now, who am I to tell these men that the show did a fair portrayal? While I personally believe their story, I have no idea what really happened. And I think that's a main point the show illustrates. None of us, especially us as the audience, really know with 100% certainty what happened. The Menendez brothers claim that they were sexually and emotionally abused for years by their parents, particularly their father, and this contributed to their decision to kill them in preemptive self-defense. While the prosecutors claim that they made up this excuse after the fact to try and get away with murder. Both sides have witness testimonies and valid reasons for why they believe what they do. So for the show itself, it seems there wouldn't be as big of an ethical concern if they were lying, right? Because if they are, then isn't Netflix just exposing sociopathic killers? But then people would still say that showing the murder of the nice, innocent parents in detail is offensive. Even depicting true events like this in the first place is a criticism these type of shows constantly receive, and I'll talk about that more later. But with this iteration, I think people misattribute the intentions of the way the narrative is shown. I do think it's important to be respectful and authentic to people's stories, especially when they're still alive and could be hurt by their portrayal. But I also think it's important to explore the nuances of human behavior and public perception. The show dedicates entire episodes and multiple scenes of them telling their story fairly accurately from their perspective. For me, it's obvious that the majority of the series spends time making you sympathetic to the brothers, and it's only towards the end in court that they really explore the idea of them lying. And I mean, isn't that what happened? Just because the show presents contrasting ideas or shows someone else's differing perspective, it doesn't mean that that's what the creators agree with, or that that's necessarily the takeaway that you should have. They show the brothers crowds of groupies and supporters, and they also show the people who called them liars. That's accurate to life. I think it would also be disingenuous to not portray the accusations they received. If they just skimmed over the lies that were told about them, then that would also be offensive for not showing what they've had to overcome. To tell the whole story, you have to include events or opinions that might not be true. If you find yourself siding with one outlook more than the other, that's on you. You're given enough resources from various points of view to form your own opinions, and I think we should be allowed to do that.
The show is a very interesting, what we're trying to do is a Rashomon approach, where we show many perspectives. That's what the show does. In every episode, you are given a new theory based on people who were either involved or covered the case.
This adaptation is based on a true story. It's not a historical documentation of true events. If the Menendez brothers were personally involved with every step of the writing and filming process and had complete oversight of the show, it still wouldn't be the whole story. Personal anecdotes and memory are subjective, and that's not to take away from their pain and feelings, because like I said, I believe them. But I'm just emphasizing that no adaptation will be perfect, but that doesn't mean that we can't still try and create something compelling. How many people do you think will come away from this series having never heard this story before and now be against the brothers? It seems this show, no matter how inaccurate some details were portrayed, has raised a ton of awareness for the case. There's more people campaigning for their release than ever. So I think to really criticize this show, you have to attribute malicious intent to everyone involved, and I think enough care was put into it to dispel that accusation. In seeing their story dramatized on screen, I felt more empathy for them than I ever would have otherwise. From what I can see, it doesn't seem either of the brothers can watch the series from prison, just hear gossip about it. And by all means, I don't think they need to watch it. Reliving their trauma must be extremely agonizing, but that doesn't mean that the rest of the world can't learn about it. And again, everybody seems to be on their side. There's a weird dynamic here about the influence of entertainment. On one hand, this is a single show amongst hundreds that people may or may not consume in a weekend and then forget about soon after. So what's the point in getting offended if it's just a bunch of actors playing in front of cameras? On the other hand, stories can be very powerful. They can lend a voice to the unheard and can have an influence on public opinion and culture. But regardless, they still are all entertainment. Schindler's List is entertaining, and studios profited from its success. 12 Years a Slave was so effective because it dramatized events for the audience so that we could sympathize with the real victims of those atrocities. I think it would be far more offensive to gloss over or sugarcoat these types of stories whenever we talk about them. So going back to shows like Monster, is it okay for us to be interested in seeing true crimes depicted like this? I think the visceral and emotional reaction you have is a good thing. It means that you're feeling something. It causes you to actually care. Too many of us are numb to others' suffering because of the pipeline of despair we have access to online. When you normally see articles or even videos of people dying, how much mental capacity can you possibly give to try and care about each one? Especially when they are only seen when mindlessly scrolling between shitposts and memes. I think it's ultimately a good thing that people have knowledge of these types of true events, and this long-form medium is the best format to relay such stories. With skilled filmmakers utilizing dramatic cinematography, immersive music, and captivating performances, it causes the material to stay with you longer and actually provoke some thought. That's the magic of entertainment. You can really be psychologically impacted by these stories. And I don't care who you are, an entire episode that's a one-take shot that's almost 33 minutes long and entirely dialogue is damn impressive. But more importantly, it's effective in getting you to empathize with the character. If you end up believing his side of the story, then it's a heartbreaking and powerful thing to witness. And if you later end up thinking he was lying the whole time, it's still fascinating, especially if his acting was able to fool you. Whether or not he's lying about what happened, the type of abuse he describes is real. So let's talk about it.
But that's when I started to do it to Erik. And I don't know why I did that, because I didn't like it when my dad did it to me. He didn't like it either. He would always ask me to stop. But I had to make it normal, right?
I have a friend who went through similar abuse as a child, where she was systematically sexually harmed by a handful of adults. She also experienced the situation of a slightly older boy abusing her after he was groomed and harmed as well. And while this is just one person's perspective, I was curious what she thought about topics like this being verbalized or depicted on screen. Her main concern was that Lyle would be depicted as an evil predator. She sees that he had a twisted but clearly understandable reason for behaving how he did, and as a survivor thinks it's incredibly important for stories like this to be told, because they never are. People either lack the nuance to want to engage with them, or it's too uncomfortable and they have to avert their eyes. So this begs the questions: is it okay for us to sympathize with people that do such awful things? And is it okay to dramatize depictions of it? I remember when 13 Reasons Why came out and showed Hannah's suicide on screen, it got a lot of backlash, even from the suicide prevention community. Nick Sheff, one of the writers of the episode and an attempted suicide survivor, was surprised by this and said, "When it came time to discuss the portrayal of the protagonist's suicide in 13 Reasons Why, I of course immediately flashed to my own experience. It seemed to me the perfect opportunity to show what actual suicide really looks like. to dispel the myth of quietly drifting off, and to make viewers face the reality of what happens when you jump from a burning building into something much, much worse. He says his own life was saved by hearing someone else's horrific but truthful story. And while this isn't the only type of conclusion that can be drawn from portraying sensitive subjects, I think it's a valuable potential outcome that needs to be acknowledged. So by having the characters of Lyle and Erik share their stories about trauma, especially as men, there's a likelihood that their story can have a positive impact on others. Hearing these topics be discussed could give people the courage to step forward with their experiences, or simply give them comfort in knowing they aren't alone. I think that's the main point the creators are trying to get across with this series, and that's the primary benefit we should focus on. The subjectivity of various outlooks from all involved will inevitably cause the story to change in some areas. But just because the creators behind the series profit from it, that doesn't mean it's in bad faith. I think there are more benefits to be found than negatives. Now, some people will probably agree with some of the positives I mentioned, but just say that they have a problem with the method that these stories are portrayed. They worry about glamorizing these hardships, and more so for shows like Dahmer, they worry about idolization and creating copycats.
And there's gonna be a movie? You know that, right? Erik, they're gonna make a fucking movie about us.
I already touched on this in my previous essay about Dahmer, but most actors are hot. That's part of the reason why they're actors. But so far in series like these, they've been fairly close in resemblance. Ted Bundy lured women to slaughter with help from his good looks and charm. So yeah, an attractive actor should play him. And while Evan Peters is a good-looking guy in real life, in Dahmer, he's not dolled up. He's greasy, unshaven, and sickly. Just because it shows the realism of how he probably acted in gay dance clubs doesn't mean that they're glamorizing it. The thing is, no matter what horrific crimes killers have done, some aspects of them will be relatable. But back to this new series, I will somewhat concede this point. Was it really necessary to have a shower scene where Erik is staring homoerotically at another prisoner? Probably not. Given what we know about him though, it's not the biggest stretch in the world. And for the series, it does help show how he and that other prisoner grew close to each other. But Ryan Murphy does have a proclivity to overly sexualize situations. But realistically, that's part of life too. Yeah, the actor of Lyle is ripped. But so what? Should all actors be required to method act and risk permanent harm to their body? Does it make you uncomfortable that you could be physically or mentally drawn to someone who's betrayed the way he is? Well, that's just reality. And this is more so for people like Dahmer. But if you go so far in the other direction to demonize them as absolute embodiments of evil, then you just mythologize them as something unreal. But they are. As unsettling as these events can be, it's just what life entails. People's psyche isn't black and white. Their lives go through the same spectrum of emotions as ours. So I don't think it's glamorizing to show nuanced aspects of their lives or show their sexuality. Also, the show is called Monsters. For the Lyle and Erik story, most people say that applies to the parents and not them. I think the title may be necessary to upfront show condemnation for the crimes they commit, but I don't think labeling people as subhuman ever does any good. Now, to this, people may call me a sensitive snowflake, fighting for the rights of serial killers. But I think that's a deflection of the darker truth I'm trying to show, and that is that they really are human.
Impassioned terms, you forget that there's a lot of him that's in you.
I don't know about that.
There is nothing that this guy has thought that you haven't thought at one time or another.
They aren't that different from you or me. There's more commonalities between us than there are differences. And under the right set of circumstances, you too could be capable of such deeds. And that's not a pleasant thing to realize.
Right, I know why you're confused. Because of, yeah, I understand that. Because I take showers with them sometimes after tennis. I wrestle with them, I grab them, I touch them, come on, that's completely normal. That's something that my father did with me as well.
It seems the popular public consensus online is that the Menendez brothers are telling the truth and the parents are the real monsters. So they'll end up saying that the crime was validated and that they should be released. But then they just go on to demonize the father. And not to take away from or defend his actions, but it's odd nobody ever sympathizes with him. It's easy to feel sorry for people when they're younger and more vulnerable, but why do you think the father turned out the way he did? I was surprised how much detail and character development they gave to him in the series about abuse he experienced as a child. So I know this is uncomfortable and maybe unnecessary to point out, but why can't anyone feel bad for him too? Why would he cope with life in the way he does, or even have the urges to do those things to his own children? Is there not some dysfunctional aspect in his outlook on life? He said that what he was doing to his boys was to make them tough, like the Spartans. That through pain and physical intimacy, they could form a bond and be stronger. Throughout the series, he also emphasizes how he always wanted to have a family. Maybe he's just trying to rationalize his actions. But what if he simply didn't want to be alone? And because of the horrific abuse he received as a kid, these sadistic methods were the best way he saw fit to achieve this. And again, I'm in no way justifying what he did. I'm just saying that his internal reasoning was a human one. He wanted to make his children resilient and tough, and in a sick way, he did. What these boys went through has made them brave, and I think any format that helps share stories like this serves a vital purpose. Dramatizations offer more than mere entertainment. They invite us to confront the uncomfortable truths of human behavior. And whether or not this was accurately adapted, I think this series achieves this goal. Thanks for watching until the end. If you want to support the channel even further, consider joining my Patreon. You can participate in monthly Q&As and get insight into what I'm working on next. And a huge thanks to those of you who are already over there. Thanks for watching my videos.